it's Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and welcome back to my channel where I make a lot of cake and cookie decorating tutorials as well as give a lot of baking business tips, and we're back for a traditional cake decorating video. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made my niece's 6th birthday cake. And you know what's great about making cakes for kids? As you get older, you start getting more out of touch with what is trendy. And honestly, I had no idea who Teenieping was. Not even sure if I'm saying it right now, but I did like the fact that I haven't made this character before, so it was a little bit more of a new experience. As you guys know, I'm so over making things like Paw Patrol. I underestimated the amount of batter that I would need for a 10-inch and 8-inch cake, so as you can see, my cake pans were not very full. These are really short cakes, so in order to conserve as much cake as possible, as soon as they came out of the oven and they were still quite warm, I flipped them upside down onto that cooling rack just so that they compress the shape just a little bit. And of course, there is a little bit of that dome shape, but I can cut off as little as possible so I can conserve as much cake as possible. And then I end up filling in the gaps with this delicious Oreo and Biscoff buttercream. Ordinarily, I'm not really an American buttercream type girl, but it really worked in this instance. I had a commenter talk about how much they don't like American buttercream, which is totally fair, but what I do to make it a little bit more pleasant and a little less sweet and not too buttery is I always like to do an add-in. American buttercream that's just vanilla can be a little bit too sweet in my opinion, so I like to do something a little bit different. Now you might be thinking, adding in cookies, does that not make it sweeter? But somehow it does tamp down that sweetness just a little bit. I think because there is naturally some salt in those cookies. I also do add in heavy whipping cream into my American buttercream, and I lower the amount of icing sugar that I feel like some recipes do call for. I'm more of a higher butter ratio girl, which means that things like cookies really help to get rid of that overly buttery taste. Sufficient whipping of your buttercream is also really important because sometimes we get scared by that yellow buttery color and we think, oh, it needs more icing sugar because it's still very yellow. But the truth is you just need to whip your butter a little bit longer. The longer you whip it, the more whiter it tends to get. I forgot to mention this earlier, but of course, since this is a tiered cake and I know it's not going to be eaten all in one go, I did add a 1-to-1 ratio of warm water and granulated sugar to each of the layers to ensure that things stay nice and moist. And if you're wondering, yes, I am crumb coating on a pastry pan because I ran out of cake boards, and honestly, now that I'm not making cake at the frequency that I used to, and especially since I'm not making them for actual public customers, I just don't have as many cake boards on hand. So I'm just using what I can, and I don't want to use a plate because obviously there's flexing on my plates, so this is the flattest best thing that I could come up with. When I'm making fondant cakes, sometimes I will crumb coat the cake twice just to make sure I'm getting as sharp of edges as I possibly can. If you are going to crumb coat twice, I do recommend that in between those crumb coats you do place it in the fridge, and it's American buttercream so it crusts up super quickly. I would say about 10 to 15 minutes in my fridge does the trick. Also, I used to crumb coat with a shorter spatula. I really love that this scraper is so tall, so it gets really that nice, clean, sharp edge. Sometimes I find that my other scraper is not quite tall enough. So if you're just starting out with cake decorating or maybe you want to switch up some tools, highly recommend a scraper that is nice and tall like this. By the way, earlier in the video, you did see me just tossing the cookies directly into my KitchenAid stand mixer and letting that do the job, but if you want a very fine crumb throughout your buttercream, highly recommend pulverizing it and then putting it into your buttercream after that. If you've been a longtime viewer of my channel, you know that satin ice is my jam. That is the fondant that I like to use. I do not mess around with homemade fondant, and I use Wilton when I need to, but I am using a different type of fondant today, and it's kind of blowing my mind a little bit, but I'm not going to share what it is until I've used it a few more times, just in case it fails me somewhere along the road. Bulk Barn just opened up near my house, and I just discovered how amazing it is. Yes, this was the first time that I ever went in there, and this is the fondant that they carried, and honestly, pretty impressed. It wasn't drying out on me, and things were rolling really beautifully. It also took really well to the gel food colorant without drying out or getting too sticky. I used to be the queen of cornstarch, but now I just put down a little gentle layer so that things don't get too sticky, and then I do add a little bit of shortening to my fondant just to keep it nice and pliable. I wasn't working as quickly as I should have, so you can see on the upper edge there, I'm getting a little bit of that elephant skin, which means it has kind of those holes and it's a little bit dry, but I do end up fixing it, and this is one of the things that I really liked about this brand of fondant. I could actually fix it. Now, I'm not sure if it was because the temperature was just perfect in my home or what, but once I've tested this out in multiple circumstances, I promise I will share. I should quit teasing you and just get back to the tutorial. So then after that, I smoothed it out with a fondant smoother and everything was ready to go. After I covered the fondant tiers, it was time to move on to the character itself. Now, I'm not sure if the character is called Teenieping because there was a lot of different Teeniepings, I think they're called, but I was just going to do the main one, which was a nice pink one. I have not made fondant characters in a little bit, but I was happy that nothing actually went drastically wrong with this one. In order to get things working really, really well for me, I added in some Tylose powder to my fondant. Basically, this turns it into a gum paste. And a gum paste is basically like fondant, except that it dries a lot faster and a lot harder. You can totally make fondant characters fully without any of the Tylose powder and while using fondant, but I just think it's easier because if you want to stack pieces on each other or you actually want a standing character, then you're going to need something that dries faster or else you're going to be waiting for that fondant to dry out and it's going to take forever. One trick that I really learned early on is adding some sort of piece of stability in the center of the character. Otherwise, sometimes the heaviness of the head can cause the body to sink in. And you'll notice I did a really easy kind of teddy bear style body. I did not want her standing up because I knew that that would prove to be a little bit trickier. So I'm placing this Teenieping sitting down. It's just way, way easier on me. One trick that I learned from Zoe's Fancy Cakes right here on YouTube was actually to indent those eye sockets. Before I used to just place things directly on, but it always looked a little bit strange. And even though this is just a cartoon character, the dimensions look a lot more normal when you indent. Same thing with the smile here. I could have gone one of two ways. I could have just painted this on with an edible black paint, but I think indenting the mouth gives it a little bit more depth. By the way, I am attaching everything with just water. You could make an edible glue by just mixing a little bit of Tylose powder and some water together. I also saw some edible glue at Bulk Barn actually. You can also get it on Amazon or pretty much anywhere, but water does the trick, so save your money where you can. There are definitely instances in which you do need edible glue. Specifically for florals, I find it really, really does a good job, but since the pieces here are really light and everything is quite small, everything is going to stick with water and you're not going to have an issue of things popping off. One of the things about working on a character that you don't actually know is you really, really have to pay attention to whatever picture you're given and try to copy exactly that. Because honestly, I didn't even know what this was here. Is this hair? Is this part of her body? I have no clue, but it was giving me old school Sailor Moon vibes, so I just kind of went off of that. I was also given several pictures where she looked slightly different, so I felt like a little bit of creative freedom was warranted. My original intention was to put a skirt or some article of clothing onto this character, but it only occurred to me once I got in the car and was holding the cake for delivery that I completely forgot about that part. And that is the beauty of making things for family who aren't actually paying you in dollars. Because if that was actually for a paying public customer, you just know I would be hitting the brakes and turning around as quickly as possible, trying to think of how I was going to make a skirt. I was really loving the fact that this cake was mostly just staying pink and white and a little bit of a darker pink, which really required not too much effort on my part, but then I thought it does need a little bit of a pop, and it looks like her eyes are purple in the picture that I see, so I decided to go with little pops of purple on this cake too. Welcome to the most nerve-wracking part of the video. I'm sure you all get this feeling, whether it's about piping, writing, or painting like this, but painting on with edible black paint is scary because there really is no going back. I mean, you can steam things off and it will get rid of most of it, but you'll always have a little bit of black residue, which means that if you're a perfectionist, you're probably just going to want to redo the section that you messed up. So I was only half breathing when I did this. I wasn't super stressed out while decorating this cake, but I must say that once that fondant character was done, I felt like I could just focus on the fun parts of cake decorating. So after everything had set for a little bit, and I do like to make sure the fondant sets just a little bit, especially on that bottom tier, because I don't want things indenting once I start stacking. I take the exact same size of cake board as my upper cake to make sure that I have a little indent for it. I used to just stack right on top of the fondant, but then I found I always had to add a ribbon or something in the middle to cover things up. So this way, things can sit inlay and a little bit more flush. One thing I always say about tiered cakes, and I don't know how I worked at a bakery for so long and we didn't always do this, but always make sure that you use a cake drum on the bottom of a tiered cake. Cakes that are 100% real and there's no foam tiers are extremely heavy, and it is hilarious when you hand over a cake and you say it's heavy, but they always underestimate you and then they almost drop the cake. Okay, that's not super funny, but it is always a little bit satisfying when you're holding the cake and you hand it off to like a husband or something and he thinks that you're just being weak, but really, it is heavy. And therefore, that is why you need the support of a cake drum, because inevitably that board is going to bend even a little bit, and then that's going to cause imperfections on the bottom of your cake, and it can even wreck the stability of the entire cake. Also, having a cake drum is really important because you need to stick that dowel right into the cake board, and it needs to have something to hold on to so that during transport, you're not going to have a panic attack. Adding fondant details to fondant used to be the bane of my existence because things would always fall off. I would use the edible glue and then I would start to see the edible glue, or I would use royal icing and I would see the royal icing. But the truth is, if you have a clothing steamer, all of your troubles are gone. Use a little bit of steam just so that things get nice and tacky, and then you can put on any piece of fondant decor that you want. Now I'm making that fake drip on the top of the cake. I'm using my cake board just so that I know how big I need to actually make this, and some of the drip is going to be quite long and some is going to be short. The reason that I have to make one side pretty long is because I have a very noticeable gash in the side of the top of the cake, which is no problem. We're just going to cover it right up. Honestly, up until that little gash, everything was going pretty perfectly, but sometimes you just gotta cover up a little cake mistake. I know that I'm using a lot of different cake tools in this, but honestly, if you're just kind of a part-time cake decorator and this isn't something you want to throw yourself completely into financially, but you want to decorate some cakes, you can get a lot done with just a really nice sharp blade and a rolling pin and a fondant smoother. Do the other tools make things a little bit easier? Sure they do, but you can always improvise. That's what I love about working with fondant. Like right here, I am cutting fondant with scissors. This used to drive one of the bakers that I worked with crazy, but sometimes you just need the scissors instead of the X-Acto knife. Like the X-Acto knife just would not give me as clean of a cut on that angle since I have nothing underneath that. So sometimes you need to whip out the scissors or whatever tools that you have at your disposal. Working with fondant can seem really intimidating at first, but honestly, it's pretty moldable, and it's even more forgiving than things like Play-Doh because there is more elasticity to that. And I'm just working this drip all the way around to make sure that it's sitting perfectly flat where I need it to. And see, I'm covering up that little gash at the bottom, and it's fine that it's overlapping a little bit because it's a drip. Sometimes that happens with chocolate drips or whatever you're imagining this drip to be. Some people find this work a little bit tedious, but I actually find it quite therapeutic, and I really, really love that I don't have to continually go back in and use edible glue to get each and every one of those sprinkles on there. And these are not fondant sprinkles, they're just regular old sprinkles, but they are longer in variety, so it actually works a lot more perfectly for this cake than anything else. Like, I think I bought them for cupcakes, but it works much better for a large-scale cake like this. Truthfully, I really didn't know what direction to go with this Teenieping cake. I tried to look at some different inspiration online. A lot of people did do a Candyland-like look, and I decided that that was the easiest and the prettiest and the cutest, and I knew my sister would love it, and more importantly, I knew my niece would love it. So I'm just creating kind of some swirls here using rolled out fondant, and by the way, if you're ever having difficulty with rolling your fondant like this, add a little bit more shortening in there. You want that elasticity so that you can continue to work with it without it drying out. And then I'm cutting it into pieces and just swirling it around itself to give that lollipop look. And I actually do end up sticking a regular lollipop stick right into there and then adhering it to the cake using my steaming trick. It's times like these where I do wish I just had molds for these things, but it is also fun creating these things all on my own. Here I'm making some macarons. I love making fondant macarons. I also love making macarons. I think I'm just a macaron person. I know not everybody likes them, but I'm into the look and I'm also into the taste of real macarons. And I'm going to place this on the top and then I'm going to add those details in. I just found if I add the details in when it's off of the cake, it feels more difficult. It feels like there's more room for error. I like when there's finer details like this and I can place it directly on the cake to go that route. Some of you might be wondering, doesn't that overheat the cake when you're using that much steam? And the answer is no. This is also why I do like using American buttercream when I'm doing a tiered cake like this. I just find American buttercream can stand up to pretty much anything, especially after it's been in the fridge for a little while before you actually stack and add all the decor to your cake. I decided to do a 3-strand marshmallow here, again, using up all of that fondant that I've already created. I really like to make sure that I'm trying to use up as much of the colored fondant as possible. Even though colored fondant does keep just fine and you can always resurrect your fondant, it's so much easier to just dye fresh white fondant than it is to have to rework that fondant over and over again. Again, trying to use up all my colored fondant, but also incorporating some of those purple punches to go with the eyes. I used to think when you made punches like this, and if you wanted some of it peeking out of the top, you had to make sure that everything was fully and completely dry, but that is simply not the case. Go a little bit thicker on your fondant cutout, and it will stand up on its own, peeking out like that. The placement of decor is really important. I found that the top of the cake was a little bit boring, so I did make sure that I had some pieces standing up there since I didn't have an actual topper. And of course, adding on all the edible glitter because it's me and why not? And finishing off the cake with some shiny pink sixlets. And do not steam your cake again after you add something like this on because it does wreck the outer coating of the sixlets. This cake stayed out for hours on the party table and it's totally safe and stable, but if you live in a really warm environment, go ahead and place that in the fridge as long as there's no condensation in your fridge. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of this Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading when I feel like it, so be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys, and yes, I am still reading and replying to almost all of your comments. Bye!